Hello and welcome to the very first issue of Weltall podcast, the first and the most important podcast about uh, Masada works. I'm your host, SingerOfWhiteLine.
And I'm Zach.
Yes, and with me we have Zach, and this is our very first podcast, so don't be surprised if we mess something up. Hopefully, uh, hopefully you will enjoy it despite our shortcomings. So, first of all, why are we doing this? Uh, this idea wasn't mine, so I guess Zach should explain it in my stead.
Well, the idea was that we should be able to discuss news and developments regarding Dies Irae, Shinzaverse, and all this stuff that's been going on over the last year or so. This last year has been, I kind of call it the Dies Irae Renaissance. This last year or two. We'll go into that later, I think. But the idea here was to discuss news coming from both sides of the pond, both from Japan and from the English-speaking community. And since both of us kind of frequent both of those, both of those angles, and in general, just create maybe kind of a sense of community, a sense of discussion.
Yeah, so basically, because of all these new developments that happened to Dies Irae, like the translation of the original visual novel, the release of anime, the oncoming release of the first mobile game about Dies Irae and its series, more and more people started discussing it. And not only have we figured that hey, maybe something will listen to us if we just talk about stuff we always do talk about, but also we can use this opportunity to maybe educate people to some degree, because while
knock out some misconceptions, maybe.
Yes, because while the translation of the original novel is excellent, maybe the best translation I've ever read, we don't have the entire mass of Masada works translated as of yet. But we have read most of them, so we can discuss it, we can tell you about them, and maybe, just maybe, translate some of them as well. Which we do, because this here is Weltall subs. I am SingerOfWhiteLine, also known as SingerOfW or Soul or Swall, because that nickname was way too long for my good. I work in this group as an editor. I edit all the subs we put out, including
his job is to clean up my mess ups,
basically, which there aren't that many of.
If you say so.
In my free time, I work as an editor, I work as a tutor of English and Japanese, and I translate lots of manga, including Dies Irae, into Russian, as a member of the Neo Asakusa translation team. And I also have a Russian Dies Irae fan group, which I lead and translate some snippets of various novels into Russian as well. And who are you, Zach?
I'm nobody, actually, but
just passing by Ikemen.
Yep. I'm a translator, like, supposed to be a translator. I don't have that much experience. I'm lucky that the first thing I translated was Dies Irae, because that's something I just know a lot about. Yeah. So it was a good entryway, because it's something that I'm pretty savvy with. Yeah. So yeah, I'm currently the only translator for Weltall subs. We had another translator who worked alongside me before that, and he resigned right around the time the anime's television run was over. We miss him greatly. If you're listening to this, we miss you. Not that I don't talk to you every once in a while, but we miss you. And while we're waiting for the final episodes to stream, at which point we'll be swamped with work, I also took on translating some of the audio dramas as a pet project, with Swall helping me.
Yes.
Both with editing and some technical issues. And I'm basically the translator who's no good with technology, so I rely on Swall a lot.
Well, most importantly, you have a good grasp of both English and Japanese, and I believe those are the most important things you have to be proficient at as a translator. So we're good, I think.
I hope so.
Speaking of audio dramas, those are also a sort of a way to educate the Western audience, so to say, because a lot of Japanese memes actually come from audio dramas. So by translating the dramas, we hope to bridge the gap between the two fan bases.
Yeah, it's one of those things where there's a lot of, like, if you look at the Japanese fangs, they have like their own memes, their own, like, almost their own language when discussing entire quotes that come from those things, from these audio dramas and from these countdown videos and from all this basically supplementary material that's like that you wouldn't get just by reading the visual novel. And my idea when we came up with the audio drama translations was to basically to make as much of a replication of the experience a Japanese fan of Dies Irae has, like having these audio dramas, having these supplementary materials accessible.
Yes. Of course, we won't be able to translate all of it, and since Japan and the West are two very different spheres, so to say, we can't just replicate it perfectly, but we sure try.
Of course, yes, we can do it as much as possible, as much as we can.
And part of that is recording this podcast, despite having little to no experience recording one. Okay, so I think that should do for the introductions, and we can get to our very first topic of today, which is
the PV that came out last Friday.
Yes, last Friday we got a second promo video of the last 6 episodes that will be streamed actually on various Japanese media platforms. We had no idea when that would happen, except for the raw.
We knew it would be around July. Yeah.
Yes, July, and that's it. And now in light, we just assumed that July meant like 23rd, 25th.
Yeah. We assumed like 23rd because the third Blu-ray was set to come out on the 23rd. They actually pushed it back a week, as we found out with this one.
They actually pushed it back to September, I believe.
To September? No, I think it was to August. Wasn't it to August?
I think so.
I think the PV says it's in August.
Maybe.
We can check later. Either way, they pushed it back, and we originally thought that it would come out around the same time as the third Blu-ray, because that Blu-ray has episodes on it.
Yes, but on the 3rd of June we had a special event where the fans could enjoy some sweet time with the voice actors, etc. And apparently the last 6 episodes will be streamed on July 1st, which is less than slightly more than 2 weeks away.
Is it? It's
less than a week away.
It's less than 2 weeks away.
Yes.
It's a week and a half from now.
As you can guess, I'm not good at maths. So, We already had one promo video which came out at the beginning of May. It was our very first glance at the last 6 episodes, and naturally it focused on the first 2, I believe,
Yeah, it
which
looked
are
like.
episodes 12 and 13 if you go by the official uh, label. That promo video was mostly focused on Trifa's fight with Machina and other commanders, and actually the second promo video doesn't seem to be that different in that regard.
Yeah, it seems to be like more of a later fight, like a collection of later fights, because in the visual novel, basically, our main characters had 3 concurrent fights with the 3 main generals. Kay was fighting Eleanor, Ren was fighting Machina, and Shiro was fighting Schreiber.
Yes.
And we basically saw the lead up to some of these fights already. No, we basically saw the lead up just to Schreiber's fight with Shiro. We haven't seen quite the lead up to everything else.
We saw very small snippets from the very beginning of the fight between Ryan and Machina, and the fight between Eleanor and Kay. And we also saw lots of exposition from Mercurius, because that's what he does. And,
Exposes, yes.
And
expositions.
Yes. And even more good time from Father Trifa. I actually believe that they didn't have to. While I really love Narita Ken and his voice acting, I don't think we really needed another shot of his new form, of his transformation, of his iconic lines, which are again very beloved and quoted by the Japanese fans. I think we should have rather had more of the commander spotlight, because if we assume that the last trailer was dedicated to episodes 12 and 13, then it should mean that this new promo video would be dedicated to episodes 14 and 15, which means that it would have been like it would have had some Rhea Senpai, which it did. It would have had some talk between the commanders and Reinhardt, which is one of my favorite scenes of Mari Root, actually. And instead of that, we just kinda had the same thing we had in the last video, and like a minute and a half on top of it.
I don't know, because if we like divide the PV into like two, because
yes, it should be noted that it's twice as long as the
it's twice as long. So I think I don't know if it's fair to assume that, but it's probably just 2 PVs kind of put together into one. So the first half was very much focused on Trifa.
Yes.
It had some Rhea in the start, but that's like that relates to Trifa as well because of his relationship to Rhea, and that was the first half was very much focused on Trifa, which makes sense. Trifa is a significant character, but the second half I feel was kind of related to the generals. We did have like the freeway fight between them. We had some Ren versus Reinhardt, a little bit of that.
Yeah. Yes, of course.
Ren achieving Bria.
Yes.
All of that. We had all of that.
Reinhardt achieving absolute.
Yeah, here and there. Yeah, that's at the end of the first one.
Yes.
It's worth mentioning though that they kind of changed the pacing between the VN in that we have Ren like supposedly achieving Bria completely for the first time during that fight with Reinhardt, which is not exactly how it went in the VN, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I believe he already had it by the time he fought Machina, because Machina is broken as
Yeah,
hell, like
yes,
everyone is, so
yes,
he had to reach the same level to even hope to beat him.
yes, exactly. He kind of already grasps it in the end. The anime has already gotten to the point where he kind of grasps a bit of how to use it, but he hasn't, like, we didn't have the old Haria, all the pyrotechnics surrounding it yet.
Yes.
And the first time we see it in the trailer is apparently against Reinhard, which would have been at the time when he achieves ZackZeal instead,
Yes.
which is interesting.
Well, it should be mentioned that we already had some strange things about Ren's progression over the course of the story,
Yes.
because the fight with Spine basically went all kinds of wrong.
For Spine.
Yes. So
Um,
maybe it's natural that he already reached Bria against Reinhardt.
no, he achieved it technically for the first time on the bridge, when he went Einfaust finale without
Yes,
knowing
yes.
it.
Which was kind of weird too, but we won't judge it yet.
Yeah, it was. It's worth noting, and this is something that I would like to point out. A lot of fans I've seen have been questioning some of the choices that the anime made.
Yes.
All sorts of choices that the anime made, including
I
the
think
bridge.
we will have an in-depth discussion about that in some later episode when we have the
Yeah,
whole
probably.
picture, when we
Yeah.
can judge the Western fan base's reaction to the last few episodes, etc. But for now, yes, there are some questionable things that anime did, and some things that it did rather well, in our opinion, but the Western fanbase still didn't really like.
Yeah, but my point is that
Yes.
a lot of these additions were additions that Masada made, that they either intended to
Yes,
be in the visual novel or that he added later on. Things like the huge skeletons. Those are basically Kajiri Kamui Kagura references.
Yes.
So yeah, it makes sense that the generals would have them. If anything, it's questionable why they didn't have them in the original visual novel, all things considered.
Well, because they are kind of part of Reinhardt, and his
kind of, sort of.
castle is out there.
You can make all sorts of speculations about that. The point being is that none of these decisions are something that was shoehorned without any thought into it. Some of it was stuff that Mazda did intentionally.
Yes.
So I personally try to not knock too hard on them, even if I don't like them. I think that the animes, I'm gonna kind of go on a general statement here, and that's something that we'll talk about later.
Yes.
But I think that a lot of the anime's issues weren't with what it had, but rather with performance. It was performance issues and not content issues.
Yes, I suppose.
In terms of content, it actually added some stuff we didn't know. It kind of helped. Structure the overall. Added something to the structure of the story, because you got to realize that there are like 60 years between Berlin and the beginning of the story, and
Yes.
a lot
Or
of those
70.
years are blanks. 70 by then, yes. No, it's 60. It's 60.
Actually, in the manga, the action takes place in 2016, because Ren and his friends have smartphones already and all that kind of stuff.
I don't know how much that I don't know how much you can like.
Well, I think they do have smartphones in the anime, right?
No, they have smartphones in the anime, but that's besides the point. I think it was something. It was a decision the manga made that I'm actually not entirely sure why they did that. I think 2006 makes, like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
Everything else is 2006. I think the anime is 2006.
Yes, the most important point here is that a lot of time passes between the two main events.
And we have a lot of blanks. Like,
yes,
everyone's favorite character, Spine, did a lot of stuff in these 60 years that we don't know of, and the anime actually added a bit to Spine's involvement in Irender, and you see that a lot in the...
More accurately, I think it just showed what we have learned from one of the novels.
I
I
haven't
haven't read it yet, so I don't know for
me,
sure.
me, me either. So I can't talk about it too much. But even if it showed it, it still included it. It still
Yes,
added.
yes,
It still
absolutely.
added more content. It added more context. It fleshed out the setting. So I think that's important to note.
Yes. Uh, Another note to say here that makes the anime like less newbie friendly, I suppose, because it's first and foremost a product for the fans who
Yes.
supported it, who paid their own money to help produce it. And actually, I believe it's the most money any anime project ever got.
Well, I don't know how many of those.
Like,
How
I
many?
believe the
How many anime get
second
crowdfunded? I
biggest
don't know.
project was Nekopara, and we know how that turned out. Uh,
Well, it was an OVA to be honest, so it's a little
yes, and
different.
it
But
still got about as much money as DS did, and DS is a TV anime.
yes. Well,
Mm,
I assume they also had some funding of their own to throw in
yes,
just.
yes. We have
But
DMM Pictures on the board. We have Lantis, I believe, and all
yeah.
that sort of stuff. But what I'm trying to say here is that anime is more expensive than most fans think it is, which means that even with as much money as they got thanks to the crowdfunding, it still means that they can't produce it on the same level as like Ufotable does.
Of course, but of course that doesn't excuse it from bad decisions. I mean, like I think episode zero made a lot of bad decisions,
Yes,
which I think episode zero is definitely the appropriately enough. It's the darkest hour for the anime in a lot of ways. It
especially
also,
in the Western scene.
especially in the Western scene, though, you know,
What do you mean this anime has Nazis in it?
that's a discussion for another time.
Yes,
But a very loaded discussion at that.
yes,
But I think the important thing to note here is that like the animation was wonky. There was a lot of like you said, there were a lot of budget constraints that got in the way of the anime's technical quality. But that's not to say that the anime didn't make directional mistakes that could have been done
yes,
better.
yes, I suppose.
That said, it's worth noting that the anime in general, I don't regret that the anime came out. Put
Yes,
simply,
yes,
because the anime was like I talked earlier about the Dies Irae Renaissance. The Dies Irae Renaissance happened because of the anime, because of the
yes,
crowdfunding,
absolutely.
and it gave us a lot of stuff. It even gave us interview with Kazuko Bay. It gave us
Yes,
Wilhelm game, which is it's a Shinza game. It
yes,
expanded, and it very much expanded Dies Irae's universe in a lot of ways. And it came with an amazing soundtrack, with amazing art. It was it was the full package, even if it wasn't a very long game.
yes,
And it also gave us a new audio drama focusing on Machina and on Mikhail and Lotus. It gave us a whole lot of material, and it also enabled the Dies Irae Pantheon. And while not everyone is pleased with Pantheon's existence because of Gotcha,
let's
it
say
it definitely it's a huge deal in what it does for the series. It's a
yes.
huge deal in what it does to the story,
Yes,
and we
we'll
will get
explain it
into
a
it.
little bit later. But
Yes.
to wrap up the discussion of the anime, from the second video, do you think the creators learned from their mistakes, and will the last 6 episodes improve in any way?
Um, that's a big question. I feel like.
Yes, because
Um,
the general opinion seems to be that the expectations are very low, the CGI skeletons are still there, so people don't expect anything good out of it, even if I don't dislike them, let's say that. And
I
let's
think
stop
it
that.
depends. I think Schreiber's skeleton was fitting enough. Machines was a little lazy, I feel like.
Yes.
And it was extremely unadorned, and it just made the CGI a little more glaring in that regard.
Yes.
Uh,
And there's
but,
Tifa.
yes. But have they learned from their mistakes? I don't know, because it's not like over these 6 months the episodes have been like they started producing them as soon as the anime ended. They were in production from before that, so in that regard, I think that we can expect.
I'm not sure about that, but sure,
I think
sure.
I think they are. I think they were, um, but I do think that they might like. I hope that they learned in terms of direction what to do and what not to
Yes.
do, because there were a lot of points where the direction went kind of wonky. I think one of the episodes had a lot of questionable fan service in it, which I'm not sure why they put it in. Like the one with which episode was that? Uh,
Are you talking about
I
Mari?
think, yeah, Mari's fan service. No, not just Mari. It also had Ellie fan service.
Yes.
Like I think it was episode 9 or 10.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, luckily we don't really have enough time for fan service in the story right now.
yeah, hopefully there's no place for it in general, but I don't know. I find it hard to imagine that with the current level of quality, they'll actually manage to pull off like the final battle as well as it deserves to be. But you know, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt for now.
Well, luckily they didn't pick the most difficult route from the visual novel, so
Yeah.
hopefully they will. Mm, so, do you have any sort of a wish list for the last 6 episodes?
Um, well, stuff that I believe we've already kind of seen bits and pieces of in the trailer, like the rooftop scene from like the ending with all the characters like sitting there and laughing.
Yes, that's
And
very important, and
that's an important one, and I think we've seen bits and pieces of it here and there in
yeah,
the trailer. Um, Mari turning down Mercurius is going to be fun to watch.
yes,
Definitely, I can't wait to see his expression. Um, and yeah, we might see like I would kind of like to see maybe a bit of the fourth side story like put into it just a little bit, like maybe a lead in.
yeah,
I know some people are hoping for a certain Kajiri Kamui Kagura reference to pop in.
yes.
I don't know if it will. I'm not even sure if I want it to appear.
Well,
Let the anime end well, please.
I would
No
be
heartbreak.
surprised if we get it because there is Pantheon on the horizon, and we
There
want
is.
to
Oh,
connect it to
there is.
that
There
and
certainly is.
buy our gacha and stuff. And
Yes.
for me, I suppose what I want out of the last 6 episodes is not even the action to be done well. I want to be properly introduced to the motivations behind the commanders, because we have some motivation for Eleanor, for Schreiber, because we had episode 0, but we don't really have anything about Makina, and his scene from the Mari route is one of my favorites, as all Makina scenes are. And I would enjoy seeing it in the anime, even if it's just
Yeah,
some
it's something.
vague
It's
Mercury bubbles and just Yasumoto and Triumi talking to each other.
yeah, because a lot of the big Machina reveals, well, the more in-depth Machina reveals actually came in Rare Route, like the big
Well,
scene
we
where
did have a flashback in the anime, so
we
I
did no
suppose
we
it
had the
can work.
yeah, so they can probably pull in some stuff in the anime. We had bits and pieces like we had the anime added all sorts of interesting stuff and stuff that weren't there before, like for example, Shiro pillaging Rusaka's Ananerbe. It was something
Yes.
that it's something that was that you could only that you could only correlate after you read Rhea's route. And then we actually saw like Rusalka's inner world.
Yes.
Which is something that wasn't there in the novel.
It was.
So yeah, so they do bring in like things from different roots. So I think we can definitely expect to see that. We should definitely see explanation regarding Machina, mostly because Machina is another fan favorite.
All characters are to some extent, really.
To some extent, but Machina is well, at least to me, Machina has a special place in my heart because I kind of like these kinds of characters that are like
same.
No. It's like characters that are like, I guess, bros in a way. He's kind of a bro.
Yeah.
He has this relationship with Ren that's actually really interesting. With Ren, with Lotus. So yeah, I kind of like him, and I do hope they give him a bit of the spotlight for that.
That said, a lot of characters didn't really get a spotlight to begin with in the anime. Like Wilhelm had like 2 fight scenes and the reference to the interview, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, that's just unfortunate on Wilhelm's side because he just got the wrong route, really.
Yes.
I think so long as it's not Kasumi or Rhea route, he just doesn't get any really good fights.
Well, that's the role he was given, basically.
That's all he was given. You know exactly who to blame for that.
Yes.
And yeah, it's unfortunate, but he did get that little reference. He did get and Wilhelm is just that kind of bombastic character. Every time he appears, he steals the show. So even though he didn't get
it was enough.
It was. I don't know if it was enough, but it was sufficient. I could say the same for Rusalka. Really, Rusalka actually got the worst ending she gets in this.
I'm not really sure about that. The Kasumi route didn't really treat her well either.
It didn't treat her well, but it didn't treat her quite as bad as
yes,
route.
Yes. It's
Mario
hard to
Root is
argue
like
with that. And hopefully we won't get any singing from Schreiber using.
Yes. Let's not talk about this scene. I don't like to think about it.
Yes. So I think that about wraps it up for the promo video discussion. Do you expect to actually get another video? Because we were promised 3 promo videos, and we got 2 so far.
Well, if we were promised 3, we should get 3, unless it's like the second video includes both of them.
Well, yeah, that's basically what I thought. That they just took 2 videos, and because the anime will air on July 3rd, they decided, well, we won't have any reason to show any promo videos in July, so let's just show both videos in June in a single video.
On the other hand, we still have another Friday coming up to it, so I guess we'll find out in 3 days if we get another...
Yes, we are supposed to get lots of stuff revealed there. And we have the merchandise shop open in Tokyo, Japan.
Yeah, that's nice. I hope we'll be able to get some of that merchandise. I'm definitely eyeing that swimsuit, the tapestry.
Yeah. All right. So that about does it for the anime, and we can shift to our next main topic of the day, which is Dies Irae Pantheon. Which actually is a thing, apparently.
Apparently, I'm still not a believer, but yes.
Well, the truth will come soon enough.
It will. The truth will come.
So, a little background about Pantheon. So, it was revealed last year around April, I believe, when.
I think so.
There were some short teasers about a brand new Dies Irae project, and you should look forward to that. And we got a website open which doesn't have anything at all, even to this day. Yes, it has 2 beautiful pictures of Ren and Mari in new outfits, which are quickly identified as their so to say god forms, and and some logos of developers, including SuperApply, which is a rather small studio which develops mobile games. On the very same day, we had an online stream which starred Masada Kyoa, among other people, and he told some stuff about Pantheon, among other things. He revealed some sprite drafts, so we learned that it's a mobile game. It uses 2D sprites. It will have some sort of team building component because we must have free spinners beating up on gods, and
Of course.
and some just minor stuff like Lisa.
Some mechanics, yes.
Yes, it's nothing major. We just know that there are attacks and they can beat people up. Well, I suppose we have a reference to Super Shinza Tyson, which is a thing in the Senshinkan series.
Yeah, it's basically like in the Senshinkan series, Shinza Banshou is a well-known franchise. Masada having wishful thinking, I guess, and it has a fighting game called Super Shinza Tyson, where you have characters from Dies Irae and other Shinza titles duking it out. And one of the first scenes in the VN has one character using Spinne to beat another character who's using Reinhardt, and it's basically everyone's dream come true.
Yes.
So yeah, that there's a reference for you.
Well, unfortunately, it's not a fighting game yet. But it might be because we just don't know anything about it. We had another really small tease of Pantheon about 2 months later, when the website got updated with another really small teaser, which includes silhouettes of all the gods which we know and even don't know about.
We've known about them, sort of, except for one.
Yes.
Except for one.
And it didn't really tell us anything except that everyone is here, as they say nowadays.
It didn't tell us anything, but it didn't stop us from getting hyped.
Yes, because you see all these old characters that we know and love. We have some less popular characters which got new forms, new arms,
new appendages. Yes,
brand new characters which we have only barely heard about, and we have another image of them, and that's it. That said,
we actually got a little more than that. We actually got some tentative names for them.
Well, we already had them before, but yeah, I suppose.
Kind of, sort of. I think Shinga and Muzan were implied. They were never exactly named. Okay, so for a bit of context, for people who only read Dies Irae and don't know anything about anything else in Shinza, Kajiri Kanwei Kagura is a semi-sequel to Dies Irae, and it is basically the title that developed the setting into what it is. Without Kajiri Kanwei Kagura, we probably wouldn't know the Shinza series as we know it now. Because there's a particular scene, and I should warn, up until now, we've been talking about Dies Irae. We assume that everyone who's listening to this knows Dies Irae, so we.
And if you don't, go buy Dies Irae on Steam and read it right now.
Exactly.
Turn this off and go read it.
Yes, but the point being, we weren't holding back on spoilers. Starting now, we're going into spoilers into other Shinza titles. So if you don't want to hear spoilers for Kajiri Kamui Kagura or Paradise Lost, you should probably stop listening now.
Well, we will try to
We will give
retain ourselves, but
we will
no
try to retain
promises.
ourselves, and we will give, of course, spoiler warnings, as I am about to give now. So, spoilers for Kajiri Kamui Kagura. There is a scene towards the end, or several scenes, but a major scene towards the end, which is called either the Shinza Meguri or the Shinza Mawari, where a character basically goes through a certain temple that has multiple, shall we say, stratums to it, and each stratum basically details every single god that has ever taken the throne of all creation in the history of the Shinzaverse.
Yes.
We'll go into what the throne is and how it works a little later.
Yeah.
But basically, it went through the 6 throne gods that we know of. And the first 2, which are the ones we know very little about, are the first one is called Shinga, which means
It basically means the truth.
It basically means truth, but it's a little more complicated than that. We will go into it. And the other one is called the Muzan, which means the remorseless. So that scene basically detailed to us these gods and what they did, and it basically helped kind of set up the setting.
It did not, however, name them.
It did not name them. So the naming of Muzan and Shinga are something that the Dies Irae Pantheon site gave us.
Well, actually, I believe we already had their names, but in a fan book for Kajiri or something like that. So it's not well known. If you read the wiki, you will know it. But if you don't, there's no way for you to learn about it.
Yes.
Until now, that is. Alright, so there was the short tease about the update on the official website, and note that it is the last time the website was updated, which was 12 full months ago.
Yeah, and you can go into it now and you'll see the exact same thing we saw 12 months ago. So
yes,
you can go into Pantheon site and you will see all these
except
beautiful...
for one thing. One thing did change. It moved its release date to 2018. That's it.
2018? 2019 maybe, no?
I don't know.
18 is now.
Well,
18 is now and it's halfway over.
Just take it for granted for now. But even without the website, we had some short teasers here and there, mostly on the official radio show, which was streamed on Nico Video and will return this summer, I believe. We had some character artworks revealed, we have some plot details explained, but mostly it didn't amount to much. Like, we know every DS character will be there, and even some more on top of that. Like, I don't know if anyone actually expected Kasumi to be there, but she will be. And same goes for Ray.
Yeah, but that was in the stream actually. The stream revealed Kasumi.
Yes, yes.
The stream revealed Kasumi along with Spine.
Yes. And not much beyond that. Oh, it did reveal some more sprites. We know Claudia will be there, and she will apparently have a hammer now because she has to fight. That's up in there for now too.
That's Claudia, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So we had some more character artworks, but it didn't really go beyond what we know about this. Like, we know characters from Ikabe will be there. There will be all Tubal kinds. There will be an unidentified number of wrens, I suppose, and that's it.
Well, yeah, in one way or another.
Yes, and Light are pretty silent about it so far, but they know that people are waiting for the game, and people desire to know at least something, like what genre will it be, or what about all these cool gods you have shown us, who are they, like tell us something.
So, anything.
Yes, and instead of that, we actually got a TV CM, which aired with the very first episode of the anime, and it didn't reveal much either. Like, it had a lot of great artwork, and it had an announcement of an alarm clock app, which is still to be released. But it will be excellent, and you won't believe it, and it will have Rusalka and Spine whispering into your ear and all sorts of stuff.
Give me my Rusalka alarm clock life. Give it, you cowards.
Yes. And after that, basically every Pantheon-related teaser was related to the mobile app. Like, in this episode, we will discuss some new stuff about Pantheon. It's Wilhelm in the alarm clock, and that's it. That said, credit is where credit is due. We did get a short tease of the story from Masada himself.
Thank you, Yuan. Thank you.
Yes, blessed by the goddess.
Yourself, yes.
So, the teaser came down to a short message Sakakibara Yui, the host of the official radio show, got from Masada, which listed a short summary of Shiro's role in Pantheon, which is more important than you might think. It mentioned that Pantheon is a story about chasing after Shiros of every respectable age. You know what I mean.
Respective age.
Yes, respective age. You know what I mean if you are a veteran fan, etc. And there is some huge enemy which will require help of all the gods, even the most egoistical ones like Reinhard or Mercurius. Like, what are they to gain? Well, something apparently. And the so to say leader of the gods is the very first god, the Truth, which we have already mentioned, and the main character, which we don't really know much about, but many assume that the unknown character from the website is the protagonist.
I hope so, because she's very cute and I want to play as a cute girl.
Well, hopefully we won't get any ugly girls here. It's literally goddesses and gods. She has an ability called Pantheon, which he uses to command all the characters from the gacha, I suppose. And the characters of Kajirika Moikagura will be given the roles of mentors, so to say. And that was it until June 3rd, which was not too long ago, actually.
Actually, no, there was a little more before that. Which when we got they released a compilation of Masada's work called the Dies Irae World Box Masada Premium, which is another piece of meme humor. And basically it was a collection of all of Masada's works, with the exception of Dear My Friend, which no one cares about. And it came with an art book. Now that art book had a bunch of art which other art books that came out for the games already had, But in the
Most
end,
of it.
most of it, yeah. But the last 2 pages actually had extra information. It basically had information about each of the existing thrones of the seven
Yes.
thrones.
And
Uh,
about the front system in general.
yes, and it basically revealed some names. It revealed each throne's title, which
Yes.
we knew some of them, but some of them were very new to us. It
Yes.
also revealed that each throne has its own emblem,
Yes.
which you can examine to learn all sorts of, which you can examine to speculate
Yes.
all sorts of things.
Hopefully we will get them in the proper quality on Friday.
We'll see.
Yes.
And
So
yeah, so that was another bit of information that we
yes.
got between
And while
Pantheon.
it did not directly relate to Pantheon, we know that surely they decided to flesh it out exactly because Pantheon is coming out and we have to know more about each and every one of the thrones, even if they didn't have any visual novels set in them. But we will learn more about them in Pantheon. So now would be a good time to talk about each and every one of them, I guess. And then we will talk about what we have learned on June 3rd.
Okay.
It's just that there is some stuff that don't make any sense unless you know the order in which the gods come and so on.
Okay.
So,
Yes.
who will begin?
Um.
Well, I suppose I should begin with the first throne, since I already wrote some stuff about it.
Okay.
But
You should read up on that post if you haven't. You should.
yeah, yes,
We'll add it in the description of the video.
yes. But before the first throne, there was
The
the
the pre-throne world, as it's
yes,
called.
the so-called Age Zero. We don't know a lot about it. We just know that it was the age filled with strife, because in the grim darkness in the future there is only war, and it was very technologically advanced, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to create such a complex system as a throne which governs the entire universe, which the throne actually is. Uh, the specific details about it are up in the air for now, but we will learn more about it soon. The gist of the throne is that there is always a person who is sitting on the throne, so to say. It's not as literal actually, but it's often described and visualized as such. This person who is lifted to the rank of God emanates his rule over the universe, and the rule can be basically everything, but it usually has to do with the god's craving, his innermost desire, what he wishes to achieve and how he wishes the world to be. And the very first god, which we will talk about, is Shinga, or the truth, or as we have recently learned, Mithra. She was apparently a very stoic woman who didn't have a lot of emotions within her, except when it had to do with her lover, apparently. But, well, that's just a tidbit from the fan book again. She became the very first god, and her main wish was to find some peace after she took part in this incredible war over who will take over the throne. and she was basically just afraid to lose her sanity because she just killed so many people. And the self-explanation she came up with was that it's not my fault. The world is made in such a way that there is good and evil. And if I am good, I must fight evil to the kingdom come. And vice versa. There is evil which must always fight good. And due to that wish, the very first throne is called the dualism of good and evil. This is a world where both good and evil exist, which might sound natural, but it's actually a really polarized world. So if you belong to the good side, you will never be able to get to the evil side, and vice versa. It's a very symmetrical world, but actually it's more of a world where evil reigns supreme, because in Mithra's opinion, good must always be the underdog. It must shine even in the darkest darkness. And because of that, the side of good is always outnumbered, and the side of evil always tries to conquer the rest of the world, and to do that it must fight good. And to go a step further, there is apparently an unwritten rule to this world, where if good tries to let me find the exact wording. So, as I have translated it in my post, the stronger evil is, the more pure, dazzling, and charming it becomes, and the stronger good is, the more crude and accursed it becomes. Which means that even if good tries to get better, even if it tries to overcome its eternal opponents, it will turn into the very thing it tries to fight. Which implies a lot of things which we don't really, which we aren't really able to.
We can only speculate about.
Yes,
them.
we can only speculate about it, but what can I say? I'll try not to repeat myself too much from the post I wrote, so I'll try to treat some new ground. So there are 7 major evils in this world, which means that there are probably 7 major goods as well. That means that we will have at least 14 new characters from this world alone, and one of them will be the next god, I assume so.
It stands to reason.
Yes. So, what are your thoughts and expectations on this world? Some comments, maybe?
Well, this world is actually what you said earlier about that unwritten rule, where if good tries to overcome evil, tries to become stronger than evil, it ends up kind of like turning over to being the new evil.
Yes.
It's pretty interesting because it means that it kind of implies that there is a way for good to become evil in
Yes,
the world of duality.
indeed.
Other than that, do we have a source about the whole 7 kings and 7 evils and 7 goods?
Well, I only have the Masada World book, and it only mentions the 7 absolute evils. So the thing about the 7 kings of good is my own speculation. So I won't say it's guaranteed there will be as many. But
Yeah,
it's just that this entire setup is kind of there must be good, there must be evil, it's symmetrical, so if there are 7 evils,
Yeah,
there
it's
must be
it
7
stands
goods.
to reason.
Yes.
Okay.
And another thing that should be mentioned here is the thing that is kinda glanced over usually, but Mifra, Shinga the Truth, is unique in the fact that she actually managed to emanate her own rule across the entire world. So this is where I suppose the more literal translation of her name would come in handy. So the word Shinga constitutes of 2 kanji. The first is truth or real, etc. And the other is us or ego
or myself.
or myself. So in other words, she is a god who emanated her own truth and no one else's, and forced it onto every single being in the universe, which was unprecedented. So this exact thing is probably her most defining feature, actually. Not the dualism, but the fact that she was the first one, that she managed to use the throne system to her merit and even shape it to some extent, because she managed to do it, other gods who followed her managed to do it as well. And there will be this pattern over time. There, each and every god brings something new to the overall system. Well, what she brought to the table is that the general concept of my truth is the only truth, and you will follow it whether you like it or not. And actually, there is one other person we know from this world who...
From World Zero.
Yes. He actually was Mifra's partner in World Zero. We don't know his original name, we know how he is called nowadays. He is called Naraka Interim. Why he is called that way we don't quite know yet, but the thing is that he became the hardware of the throne.
It was integrated in some way into the throne.
Yes. We don't know the exact details yet, but basically he and Mifra took the throne together, and while she became the, so to say, software that emanated across the universe, he became the hardware which allowed her to do it. And moreover, he has another role which is not quite pronounced over the course of the series, but is going to serve a much more important role in Pantheon. It's that in every age Naraka creates a, so to say, avatar of himself, which is supposed to propagate the change of the throne. So if one god reigns for too long, Naraka's avatar tries to make sure that it won't last forever. That
It basically helps facilitate an heir, someone who would take over the throne.
Yes. So we don't know much about his first incarnation, but we know some of them. So this is where the first throne ends and the second begins. We know about the second god mm, not much actually. We know even less than about Mithra, I would say.
Yes.
He is called Muzan, or the Remorseless. We know that he was one of the kings of good, and he couldn't bear the sight of his people dying to the side
The
of evil.
forces.
Yes,
the forces
the forces
of evil.
Yes. Of evil. And so he wished to change the situation in some way, and that is how he became a second god. He well, the exact workings are kind of blurry, but he realized that if there must be evil, then let every single person have a seed of evil inside them. This will allow them to compensate for all the taboos the side of good must hold up to, because evil has no rules, while good is constantly constrained by them. And so, to save his people, he emanated his own rule, which actually didn't really contradict the first rule. He introduced the concept of primordial sin to the world, which meant that each and every person is born evil to some extent. Well, sinful, let's say. Before we get to the second throne proper, I would like to note that, again, what the Remorseless did was unprecedented. He rewrote an entire rule of the universe. That's basically like saying, I don't like our speed of light, let's change it. And it does. And that is what actually intrigues me the most about him. Like, how exactly he did it, what sort of person he is, and so on.
He has a very cool beard.
Yes, he does. And if I had to name one thing I'd want to learn in Pantheon about, it would be him. He took the throne and started the second age, which was the Abyss of the Fallen, or Paradise Lost. And since I haven't read Paradise Lost, this is where I'd...
Do you mean the visual novel Paradise Lost or the novel Paradise Lost?
Both, actually. Well, I'm actually reading it right now, but haven't finished it yet, so I can't discuss it as deeply as you do.
Yeah, but I did, so
Yes.
I can discuss that a little bit. Paradise Lost is basically Masuda's earliest Shinza work. It's so it's probably the least shaped out compared to the rest of the series in terms of how the setting goes. In terms of how it connects to the other works, obviously, and I think it makes sense because even if Masuda did plan the setting ahead of time, he didn't exactly know where things would go 10 years down the line.
Yeah.
But what we do get from Paradise Lost are basically the images of two gods. The first of them is Muzan, which is the god we know here, and the second one is the god that will appear in the next throne, which we will discuss later.
Do note that Muzan himself does not appear.
He does not appear.
Lost, I believe.
Exactly, as opposed to the third god who does actually appear.
Yes.
But we basically get two images in the form of two cities that appear in Paradise Lost, and each of them is actually very much reflective of each of the thrones. We have Sodom, the aptly named Sodom, which is, I guess, the incarnation of Muzan's law of Paradise Lost, of the Abyss of the Fallen. which we will go into, which I will go into in a second. And the second one is a city called Zor or Zor, depending on how you want to pronounce it, which is, by the way, has nothing to do with the, or at least nothing intentional to do with the Kabbalistic term of Zor, but is actually a city which Lot wants to escape to after the fall of Sodom in the book of Genesis. So basically you have two cities which relate to the fall of Sodom, one of them being Sodom itself. Now, the way Sodom works is basically it's the abyss of the fallen. You have, it's basically a world of survival of the fittest. It said that if you live to 20, you've probably killed at least one person.
Or have some other talent that helped you survive.
That helped you survive, yes. It's a city that's closed by by a barrier, by a wall that nobody, a metaphysical wall that no one can cross, except for some people who know how to manipulate a gate that lets them go to the outside world. And it's a closed city, but it's extremely technologically advanced. You have cybernetics and androids and all sorts of shit. Basically, a lot of sci-fi material in there. People can replace their limbs. One of the characters is actually what's called a body chopper, a person who sells his limbs and has prosthetics planted his head. He does this to gain money. Yes. So it's one of those things that definitely it's a very cyberpunk setting in a way. And there's actually some and like all evil cities, it's divided into tiers, and the deepest tier is actually polluted by an odd miasma, and basically nobody can go in there without protective clothing, with the exception of one of the main characters. I'm not sure if we'll go into that main character.
I don't think we need to.
Yeah, we don't need to, but that's pretty much Paradise Lost's vision of Sodom. Sodom is basically a place where the strong trample the weak. There's a lot of violence, a lot of unrest, a lot of drug use. It's pretty much it's a city of vice, pretty much.
Do note that people still how do I say it? Help each other.
Some do, yes. It's not entirely a place of heartlessness. There are people who, in certain tiers, that do try to get along. People who are more or less decent, who try to live out their lives. It's also worth to note that there is a sort of form of government, except it's in the form of a criminal organization that pretty much controls other criminal organizations. But yes, that's about it. And on the other side,
worth noting that all the technology and bioengineering that happens in Sodom is basically pretty damn weak on the grand scale of things. So you won't see some cyber beating up even Spinne.
Yeah. Compared to like the main character and the opponents he faces throughout the story, and some other main characters that show up, most of the cyborgs are pretty weak compared to the cast of Dies Irae. Meanwhile, the main character is actually probably just about as strong as they are. And on the other side of the spectrum, we have Zor. Now, Zor is actually the image of the next throne, and it's basically a sterile white society where people have chips put in their heads to completely erase their free will, and basically you have the government basically dictating everyone's life, where they'll be in society, where they'll work, what family life they'll lead, etc., with only the highest ranking members of society not having chips in their heads for the sake of being able to make decisions. And one of the characters that appears, basically the game's main antagonist, though, like always in Masuda's works, almost always, the word antagonist is very blurry. You have a character named Neros Satanael, who is a scientist who works on Zora's side, but has apparently some kind of grand plan going on in motion regarding Sodom. He basically some of the characters that came from Zora to Sodom are all his underlings. They all work for him. They all respect him. They all fear him. They all look up to him.
Sounds kind of familiar.
Sort of. He's not as hated as the other guy.
Yes.
He's actually held in pretty much high regard, but he's kind of a chess master sort of antagonist. And yeah, it's implied that he is responsible for not just events that took place in Sodom's past, but also the current state of Zor. Like he's supposedly the one who almost built up that society from zero, and he becomes the propagator of the next throne.
Yes.
What we learned from him from Kajiri Kamikagura was actually very illuminating, in the sense that it basically detailed his creed, what bothered him about the world. He basically wanted to achieve perfection. He wanted to achieve a perfect human free of sin. He basically went directly against the Abyss of the Fallen's credo, where everyone has to have some sin in their heart. He wanted to create a world without innocent sin.
Yes.
Which in a way translates to a world without free will, a world that works like a machine. Now, his rule basically meant the removal of innocence in a world where everybody is good, everybody is flawless, everyone are without vice. It was also very static world.
Yes. It's kind of trading on the third world for now, but before we proceed, there is a lot of mystical imagery in Paradise Lost, which will probably be used again in Pantheon, but on a greater scale. Do you have anything to talk about that? Because some of it was already used in Dies Irae, actually.
Yes, it used a lot of mysticism, a lot of Kabbalistic magic, a lot of stuff that comes from Aleister Crowley and Solomon's Lesser Keep.
Yes.
It had a lot of dealing also with angels. Angels are a major theme of Paradise Lost, as you can see just by looking at the cover art. One of the game's main heroines, Rill, is very angelic in appearance. Basically, the way it works is that a lot of the arias used in this game, which are a lot rawer than Dies Irae's more customized character-specific arias, are basically drawn from assorted grimoires and Kabbalistic terms. The first Paradise Lost actually has the first mention of the Kabbalistic terms of Asiya, Bria, Yetzirah, and Atzilut.
Yes.
All of that was originally sort of in Paradise Lost, though not in the same way or in the same capacity as Dies Irae.
Oh, yeah. There's no Ewigkeit as of now.
No, there's no Ewigkeit. Ewigkeit is a very specific term to Dies Irae.
Yes.
But a lot of the magic there is mostly actually used by the angels that are included, the archangels, so to speak, which eventually comes down to free characters. Was it the free characters and Satanael himself?
Yes.
Who has all of their powers.
And this is where we can go to the third throne, and Zoar, which is emanated over the entire universe. It's also called the imperfect heaven of the Morning Star. The Morning Star being Satanael himself, because, as you might have guessed, Satanael is sort of a Lucifer of Paradise Lost. He is both tries to be good and turns out to be the antagonist for the main characters.
Much like the actual Paradise Lost
Yes,
Lucifer.
exactly. As you may know, Masada does his research. So, Zoar is a world with no sin. Everyone is born good, everything is flawless. The entire universe is similar to an electronical mechanism. It's like clockwork. It's polished, it's flawless, it's pure white. So, why is it imperfect then? Because in fact, Satanael himself did not wish for it to be this way. While he did want to create a human being without sin, he really uh, cared about the free will. So there is no use to a man without sin if he has no free will, because that's basically a robot. And unfortunately, the system of the throne went wrong somewhere.
It's pulled a monkey's paw on him in a way.
Yes, basically. While we see the very beginning of his reign at the end of Paradise Lost, from what I understand, it apparently went way deeper into his craving somewhere along the line. So it's described as a checking out the Masada visual fan book again. Yes, it's called the Perfect Paradise of the Morning Star. The Pure White Hell, or the Salt Prison. So it was really a world which put a stop to any sense of progress, because any free will, any sense of self is considered to be unnecessary. It is too close to sin to be allowed. Because of this, this reign was actually one of the most firm, so to say. It was very hard to for the next god to be even
successor to appear. Yes.
Successor to appear. And because of that, the next successor was basically an outlier in many ways. And you probably know about him way more than about anyone else.
Yes.
Yes. That is to say, Kajiri Kamui Kagura did reveal some stuff about how he came to godhood. So his original craving was, while not confirmed, it was most probably, I want to know everything. And thanks to this craving, he learned literally everything. Like, there was everything within the throne. It was a single universe along a single timeline, which had three gods reign over a single universe. And from what I understand, it didn't even reset the timeline while the gods changed over each other. But with the coming of this god, he took over all the universes, every single parallel universe imaginable, every single timeline. His craving was so unusual that he basically took the current timeline from the sidelines. And since the Morning Star treated himself as so to say immaculate, he didn't really struggle when the new god took over. He considered that if someone took over me, that means my reign is imperfect. That means I failed. That means I am not needed. That means my reign is actually harmful for the humans. And that's why he quietly resigned and handed the throne to the serpent.
Yep, the serpent.
What should we tell here that listeners probably don't know about?
Well,
what is there to say about the snake?
More than I can count, but it's worth noting that the entire aspect of adding multiple universes, of adding time loops, was credited to Mercurius. Mercurius was the first one to include that into the throne. Actually, he actually, in a way, added that function to the throne. The throne wasn't able to do that before that.
Yes, I suppose.
It's also worth noting that he's probably the best example we have of a god.
Well, it's the most well-developed.
It's the most well-developed. It's the best example we have of a god. And it also, I think it also adds a lot of food for thought regarding what's called... regarding what's called a sensory. How sensories work. Basically, a sensory is, or as we called it before, a sense of touch.
Well, I think it's translated sense of touch in the novel.
Yes, it is. So a sensory is basically a manifestation of a god that appears as a physical human. Gods, having become gods, relinquish their physical existence, but they are capable, given enough time and in the throne, they're capable of creating a physical manifestation of themselves. Now, it's worth noting that a sensory isn't necessarily aware that he's a sensory, doesn't necessarily have the memories of the god. He needs a certain stimulus to remember that.
Do note that Mercurius himself is kind of an exception to this rule because he wanted to know everything, and so his sensory knows everything as well.
I'm actually not sure about that because I think sensory Mercurius and the Mercurius on the throne are in a way a little different in that regard. Sensory Mercurius, for example, doesn't remember when he came into being, so he doesn't know everything.
Well,
there are things
you could say that he was always there because he's craving transcendent space-time, and so he doesn't really have a specific date of birth or even a place of birth.
Correct, but we can sort of look at his different incarnations like Alessandro di Cagliostro, Hermes Trismegistus, and of course Karl Kraft, either as the same sensory basically appearing throughout different times, or just basically multiple sensories who end up inheriting each other's memories. So in that regard, he's basically a very good example of the sensory idea, which is an idea that's actually extremely well developed in Kajiri Kanwei Kagura. We basically have two sensories in Kajiri Kanwei Kagura as part of the main cast, which is an idea that's extremely developed. So yes, you basically Karl Kraft is probably the best example we have as a sensory because he basically actively interferes with the world and sets events up so as to suit Mercurius' scenario, which normally Mercurius shouldn't be able to do because he doesn't physically exist, being a god. He can, because another matter about the throne is that thrones apparently have different gods apparently have different levels of interference. Some of them just create a general law, like a general law, and others can more directly influence each other. Like I tend to believe that the next god, the Twilight, is actually very hands-on in her approach regarding how she treats
literally
in a way. Yes, she's very hands-on. Very hands-on. While other gods, like for example, the Truth probably didn't have a lot of direct interference in the world. She
We
basically
don't
just
know
said,
for sure,
we
but
don't, yes, we don't know. We don't know.
Muzan had no interference at all.
At least not in the scope of Paradise Lost,
Yes.
no. Though it's worth noting that Mercurius is also, well, he's not the only one, but as far as we know, Muzan didn't exactly fight back, and neither did when he had the throne succeeded from him,
Yeah, I
and
suppose.
neither did Satanael. So it kind of makes you wonder if maybe as time goes on, uh, gods kind of naturally tend to relinquish their throne. Probably because, and this is speculation, but I tend to think that the throne is kind of a monkey's paw, like I said earlier. It ends up kind of like by seeing their wishes taken to a logical extreme, they kind of realize their flaws.
Well, I would say that every person's wish, if taken too far, starts to bite back, no matter what
Exactly.
it is.
Exactly. Ren realizes this very early on, actually,
Yes.
in Division, which is why he doesn't want to take the throne. But yeah, this is just speculation on my part. But like I said earlier, Mercurius is a very good example of a god where you can learn a lot about how Hado gods, um, about how absolute gods work
Yes.
by looking.
Oh, he also classified it all, actually. Like, he laid out the 4 levels you can rise to,
Uh,
because it was made to elevate Reinhardt to the level of God, so he had to uh, do his research, I would say.
well, I don't know if it's exactly how it is. He might have taken like some knowledge out of the second and third thrones and
Yeah,
incorporated
I
them.
suppose.
But the idea of Ewikite and the 4 levels is very exclusive to Dies Irae.
Yes,
It appears and is mentioned
yes,
in Kujiri Kamui Kagura, but that's only by characters that were originally
yes,
from Mercury's
yes,
is from.
right,
They're basically so using some of the same formula that he
yes.
worked up, but it's very exclusive and neither characters in Paradise Lost or characters in Kajiri Kamikagura, neither of them use the same system to
Yes.
achieve the same thing.
Well, it was created for a very specific purpose. It was
Yes, it was.
even described as like divine throne for newbies. Like,
In a
how
way,
to achieve godhood. You just
yes.
get a lot of souls and then you rise up. And why do you need to get a lot of souls? Because it was made for Reinhardt, who is all about gathering his legion. And this is why Ewigkeit is geared towards him. And before we move on, I would also like to comment that about the sensory of Mercury. So his motivation is actually not the same as of him as a god, as you can see in the final fight of the rare route, because uh, Karl Kraft is friends with Reinhardt. He wants to elevate him to godhood so he can end his life. But uh, then you get,
That's not exactly correct, but
well,
yes.
yes, in simplified terms. But then you get to God Mercurius, who sits on the throne, and he does not consider Reinhardt as anyone but an obstacle. Like, this is not the way I was supposed to die,
That's
so go away.
that's a little different, I think. What's basically revealed in the final in like the what's called the uh in one of the in Rey's second ending, in the
Yes,
Mitsudomo ending, as it's called, the
yes,
freeway struggle,
yes,
is that Mercurius's supposed true craving is to descend upon his own stage, to be part of his own play. That's one way his craving goes. His original craving was basically to die at the hands of the one he chose. And
so
in
he
that
has
regard,
not one. two, but three different cravings.
In a way, you can claim it's not so much that, so much as is that craving stems from the other one.
Oh,
His
yeah, I
craving,
suppose.
basically, he's got knowing everything has exhausted him. It has made him feel old and jaded. Knowing everything
Because
is actually really boring, as it turns out, because nothing can surprise you, nothing can amuse you. You're basically watching everything play out exactly as you know it does.
It's
And in that regard,
Groundhog Day, but you're a guy.
yes, Groundhog Day, except you're God. And his desire is basically to die. He wants to be killed by a worthy successor. So those kind of stem from themselves. But I guess in a way, in making this gigantic chess game of a story, he kind of wanted to have a role of his own in there, and that was his other craving.
Well, you can say he didn't have a role.
He
had
did have
more to do with
he
it.
had he had a role, but he didn't have let's just say didn't have a role in the opera proper.
I suppose.
Now, the other problem here with what you said is that you can kind of it's not that Mercurius on the throne didn't care at all for Reinhardt. You did see him as a friend. You did see him in a way sort of as an equal. What he didn't want is an ending where basically Ren and Reinhardt kind of gang up on him. What he wanted was to basically be embraced by the goddess and die in her arms.
Yes.
As opposed to being beaten by his friend and son. I feel that's the big difference here. When he says I don't want this ending, that's what he means.
True enough.
There is hostility in there because Reinhardt is getting in the way of his plans when his role is supposed to be, to keep his plans going.
Yes.
But it doesn't quite. But since it, in a way, it kind of shows Mercurius' ambivalent.
Yes.
Excuse me. How ambivalent he is. Because on the one hand, he made this huge plan and he wants to see it kind of play out the way he wanted. But the fact it doesn't play out is kind of also what he wanted. It's something unknown. It's something surprising. So he can't help but welcome it.
The same thing actually applies to Reinhardt, because he has two specific goals which kind of contradict each other, but still work in his favor. He either wants to make the world his own, so he can live in the world that befits him, not in this ghetto. Or he will fight some incredible opponent and lose, which is also something unknown to him, and that he would enjoy as well.
Yes,
and the same goes for Mercurius.
Yes, and of course there's the other, perhaps a little more minor objective, which is to basically honor his friendship to Karlcraft.
Yes.
Which is all achieved in a way in Rhea's ending. But it's also worth noting that, we're not exactly going to go into Reinhardt because he never exactly gains the throne. So it might be nice to point it out here. But Reinhardt is basically duped. He's basically cheated by Mercurius, and it's in a way that's kind of why he rises up against him in Rhea's ending, because the fact is Reinhardt can't ever actually ascend to the throne.
Yes. So his only role is to lose.
In a way, yes, because since Reinhardt is Mercurius' apoptosis, since he's his self-defeating factor, even assuming, for starters, he can't ever become stronger than Mercurius is.
Yes.
And on the other hand, even if you were able to kill Mercurius, he would be destroying himself, because he's kind of like if you assume that a god's rule or a god's world is kind of like his body, then the self-defeating factor is like the cancer. Is like the cancer cells ravaging the body. If the cancer were to kill the host, the cancer dies along with it.
Yes. Exactly.
So that's the relationship. So he would, so long as Mercurius is on the throne, he would never be able to. He would never be able to ascend. Mercurius cheated him. Mercurius lied to him. Mercurius promised him something that he could never achieve. And with that in mind, it kind of puts their the circumstances of their battle in Resrut into perspective. But yes, this leads us to the next throne,
Yes.
I think.
So the next throne, which is also partially shown in Dies Irae, is the fifth throne, Twilight Samsara of Reincarnation. It is ruled by Twilight Goddess, which we all know and love, and it comes down to people being reborn after death, time and time again. But instead of an eternal recurrence, which was the previous rule, in this world, people are always improving. They always move forward towards some happiness that will come to them sooner or later. It's worth noting that this world is not immaculate. It has its imperfections. The main idea is that both the good and bad make life worth living, and sooner or later, over the course of many reincarnations, each and every person will be happy in some way. And what else, Stacy? Actually, there is another interesting detail in the Masada book, which says that actually, first, it's the most technologically advanced of the ages, because it literally spirals out of control. People create new technology, they propagate, they actually come pretty close to age zero in terms of technology. And the second thing is that the lines between different races are actually blurred to some extent, because people at a certain period of time, people have reincarnated so much that the term race just doesn't apply to anyone. Everyone has been someone else. Race-wise, I mean.
Local French girl achieves world peace, achieves equality.
Yes. Before it all goes to shit.
Yes.
So, it's pretty good. But, as we have already mentioned, the thrones must keep changing, because otherwise they might get too close to the nature of the throne, and something bad will probably happen, and Naraka doesn't want that. Or he's just... before I forget. Naraka does propagate the changes of the throne, but part of it is due to the fact that he wants to honor Mithra's sacrifice. He wants his woman to be, so to say, he wants her memory to live on, even between all the worlds. And if some world stays stagnant for too long, it means that her sacrifice was for nothing. And
it's worth noting, it's not so much that it's for nothing, it's the a bit of speculation is that it's kind of trying to both preserve her legacy by keeping the throne intact, and will also a form of self-preservation since he's
Yes.
integrated into the throne. It's implied that his biggest fear is that eventually a throne society advances so much technologically that they approach the level of either creating the throne or recognizing and dismantling the throne.
Yes.
So it's implied that was implied at least that's his his motivation,
we
but
aren't sure if it was retconned or we just don't know everything at this point.
yes.
And this is why, despite how perfect the Twilight was, it just had to end sooner or later in the worst way possible.
Yes.
I'm not actually sure how much I should talk about it, so you go ahead.
Okay, so this is some spoilers for Kajiri Kamakagura, advanced spoilers for Kajiri Kamakagura. If you are planning to play it or waiting for a possible translation, it may come or may not come. You may want to tab out now.
But chances are, if you know about the series, you have already heard about him.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
Everything is very unfortunate about him.
Yes. Basically, the name of that god is Hajun. Now, Hajun is a very interesting name. Since
It's
it's a
not
Buddhist
a
name,
proper name, no.
it's not. It's sort of a proper name. We don't know. We don't know what his real name was if he had another name, but we know him as Hajun. Now, Hajun is a Buddhist name, and it's the full name is Hajun Marapapiyas, which is a Buddhist demon that attempted to interfere with the Buddha's enlightenment. As the Buddha was meditating to achieve enlightenment, Marapapiyas tried to plant sinful thoughts and gave him dreams of pleasures of the flesh in an attempt to distract him, but the Buddha was successful at staving off those thoughts and achieving enlightenment. Other versions of the name Hajun also translate to a killer demon, which is fairly appropriate. Basically, the story behind Hajun, it was that he was some child born into India, and he was born with a birth defect. He had a third eye on his forehead, and when they saw, and when the priests saw that, they basically assumed that he is some kind of great Buddha or God that was reborn. He was also entirely silent. He never talked. He was almost catatonic, and they basically mummified him and entombed him and buried him under the ground, which is something that they used to do indeed with people who were training to become Buddhists.
Zokshinbutsu.
Yes. Unfortunately, they misunderstood Hajun because Hajun's silence and entire apathy towards the outside world was exactly that. It was apathy. He was entirely egotistical. He was entirely misanthropic. He didn't want contact with anyone. He didn't want to be touched by anyone. For him, being buried under the ground was actually a vast improvement to being alive and worshipped underground, because he basically hates everyone except for himself. He believes that he is the center of the world, that the world is complete with just him, and that everyone else is just a nuisance, to say the least. Everyone else is trash, everyone else is filth, and contact with others is basically murdering yourself. It's basically suicide.
Yes.
It is through this status, and by the way, one of the priests who discovered him was actually Naraka's avatar. He basically encouraged people to worship him, to bury him, to.
Yes, because he was very desperate to change the lone reign in Twilight.
Yes. Now, during his quote unquote meditation, Hajin was actually able to reach the throne, to ascend to the throne, and that's where he ran into Mari. He basically ran into her and realized that for his entire life he felt as if something was touching him. And that's something he believed was Mari, because Mari's rule is, I want to embrace everyone. Now, it's worth noting, and this is, I'm going to backtrack a bit to Mari, is that Kajiri Kamui Kagura actually gave us a really interesting line about Mari's motivation, and it went something along the lines of, touching anyone beheads them. How sinful I must have been to receive such a fate. That's why I'll pray for it. The hope that exists that exists beyond reincarnation. That's the reasoning. The reason that she wants that her rule is reincarnation is because she believes that even if you can be born sinful, you might have done something wrong, but by reincarnating you can purify yourself. And it's very ironic and it actually makes a very good thematic connection, how from being unable to touch anyone, she becomes the being that embraces everyone. But back to Hajun, he basically recognizes her as something that's been touching him his entire life, something that's been trying to communicate with him his entire life, and he basically reacts to it in the worst possible way, which is to attempt to kill her. That attempt basically resulted in a major battle, which we only see little of, in which Mari summons Ren, Reinhardt, and Mercurius.
I think
in
they
some way,
come by themselves, actually.
Well, some way. Either they come by themselves, or she summons them either willingly or unwillingly. And they attempt to stop Hajun, but Hajun's craving to not have any contact with anyone, to be left alone, is actually that powerful that he's able to completely shrug off four gods at once and basically kill Mari and remove her from the throne and take over the throne by himself.
Which wasn't something he wanted, actually.
Well, in a way, he didn't want it. It suits into his plans perfectly, but it didn't go. But it didn't actually go as much as he wanted. Another matter is that he was wrong, and Mari wasn't the thing that was touching him his entire life. I mean, she was, but she wasn't the only thing that was touching him his entire life.
Yes.
Killing her wouldn't give him any peace, really. But yes.
So what was the world that he emanated?
The world that he was actually never completed. Basically, Ren survived the fight and emanated over a portion of Japan. He basically stopped time there, and by stopping time, he basically prevented Hajun's world from being completed. However, despite the fact that his rule is entire loneliness and rejection of everyone else, there were people alive in his world because his rule was never completed. But that world was rampant with selfishness. It was rampant with people who only care for themselves, who don't care for anyone else. And that's the state of affairs in Kajiri Kamui Kagura. In Kajiri Kamui Kagura, everybody is selfish, and everybody basically only tolerates the existence of others in order to take advantage of them. With the exception of a few people, the main one of them being a certain wonderful woman called Koga Rindo Suzuka, who basically preaches camaraderie, companionship, and bonds.
Which is considered like crazy talk, actually.
Yes, she's considered insane for talking like that. But she's lucky enough. But basically, Japan is divided into two in Kajiri Kamui Kagura verse. One half is the half Ren emanated in, and the other one is called the Shinshu, which is if I'm not mistaken, it's a ancient name for Japan. What it means is land of the gods. And basically, Shinshu is in a situation where basically which is should be familiar to anyone who knows a bit of Japanese history. Basically, the outside, the world powers from other countries are basically all pressuring Japan to open up, to start trading, to allow entrance of other culture into their lands, and Shinshu actually can't properly do it at the moment because half of their land is occupied by what they believe to be demons. That which is, of course, the half that Ren emanates in.
Yes.
Basically, you have there were expeditions in the past to the eastern side of Japan, and they all failed because big, powerful, evil demons decimated the forces of Shinshu and put evil curses on them and tainted them to the point where generations ahead still carry the evil curses in their blood.
Yes.
And Rindo is basically promoted to the rank of general, who would lead the expedition to the east to rid the eastern part of Japan from demons.
So, in doing so, they actually work in Hajun's favor, even
Yes.
if involuntarily.
They don't know it, yes, but they work in Hajun's favor because Hajun basically really wants Ren to go away as much as even more so than he wants everyone else to go away.
Even
because
he himself does not realize that Ren is there, actually.
In a way, he does this subconsciously. He does know something is there, but something is basically getting in the way of his rule.
Yes. And I think this should be enough before we go into any more major spoilers about Kajiri. Although we still need to mention one major spoiler, is that Hajun does get defeated despite being incredibly powerful. And we have our 7th and for the moment final throne. Which is Myriad Gods, Myriad Dawns, or Amaterasu.
Or Yaoyorozu, depending on how you want to call it, yes.
It is defined by the fact that it actually has multiple gods reigning on the throne.
Yes, it has 6. It has, as far as we know, 6 gods.
Yes. If Hajun was defined by his egotism, Amaterasu is defined by a multitude of opinions, of multitude of options. So
of multitudes of freedoms, even.
Yes. Each and every person in Amaterasu has free will. He or she can live and die any way they want. They can replicate any rule that existed before them. This means that if a person was to die, he could repeat his life all over again, like in the 4th throne. He could reincarnate, like in the 5th throne. He could just vanish, like in the 6th throne, because we kind of forgot to mention it, but in Hajun's world there is no afterlife at all. If you die, you just disappear, because that's what he wants. He wants every single person in the universe to just go away and never come back. So Amaterasu can do that as well. There are some people who wish for eternal oblivion, and it can
be arranged.
Yes, yes. And for the moment, that is the last throne we know, and we assumed that it was to be overthrown, just like any other throne until then, except that the Pantheon website doesn't have any other gods mentioned. It has all the gods we have mentioned today, along with Reinhardt and Ren, because they were gods at some point, even if they didn't reach throne proper. And Amaterasu was the last god that is mentioned on the website, and that we know of right now. So we assume that it is the era at which Pantheon takes place.
Hmm.
Which makes sense because there are many gods, and if many gods were to exist at the same time, it would be at the age of Amaterasu, because
It's also worth noting that Amaterasu were uh, very influenced by the other gods.
yes, yes, indeed,
They were influenced. They have influences from even from Reinhardt in a way, from
yes,
Mercurius. Basically they went for the Shinza Meguri in a way. They know of the other gods, and they were influenced of them, and they're also tolerant of them.
yes,
Uh, so it's so much like Mari's throne. This throne basically allows for other gods to, well, in a way, it tolerates their existence. It's a very, shall we say, polytheistic sort of,
yes. It's
which
a
makes
pantheon,
sense.
literally.
Yes, it's a well, it's not a pantheon yet. The
Yet.
pantheon's about to come, but it's like it says. It's a myriad of gods. It's worth mentioning that one name for it is Yaoyorozu, which is a Japanese word that basically means around 8 million, but it's usually used to count the number of gods in Japanese belief in both Shinto and
Yes,
Buddhism.
basically as many as you want.
For pretty much everything,
Yes,
yes.
and we are actually running out of time, but we still have the very last teaser of Pantheon that we got on June 3rd, and this is a perfect way to kind of segue into it. So, what happened on June 3rd is that Masada has written a short script, a so-called episode 0 for Pantheon, and we haven't actually seen or read it in any shape or form, but we have read some impressions of it, so we can make a general.
That said, there is the possibility of it being released later on as an audio drama, which we are
Yes,
all looking forward to.
yes. What happened there is that all the gods, which were at some point on the throne or tried to claim it, are reborn in some unspecified place, and are going to be working as a team of some sort, led by uh, the Truth or Mithra, and organized by Naraka for an unspecified purpose. Hopefully we will learn a bit more about that on Friday, but uh, before then, uh, what exactly was your opinion on it?
My opinion on it was, well, it gave us some stuff we didn't know before. And in that regard, it was very interesting. In the other, there was a bit of a feeling of that's it. I guess I kind of wished there was more to it, but it was certainly interesting. For starters, we got Mithra's full name,
Yeah,
true name. We also got Naraka's full name,
yes,
which is food for thought. Naraka Interim,
yes,
and. But basically, I would have liked if there was more interaction with the other, between the
yes,
other
true, but I
gods.
suppose they just were limited to the
Obviously,
one-setters
they
who
would,
were on the scene.
of course, of course, of course. But I would have liked if there was a little, possibly just a little more interaction with the other gods, because they're the interesting part. We want to know more about Shinga. We
Yes,
want to know more
yes,
about Muzan. I would have liked to see more out of Satana. Heck,
yes,
even Hajin would have been interesting to see.
yes,
Um, but yes, an interesting part though this this screenplay didn't mention the Kajuri Kamri Kagura characters at all,
yes.
which
Which
is interesting for all sorts of reasons. Uh,
There are some doubts about the nature of canon at this point, because as you may know, Kajirika Muikagura follows the Mari route of Dies Irae, while the canon ending, so to say, is considered to be the rare route.
yes, Ruth, correct.
And moreover, there are some details which apparently contradict what we learned before, like about Naraka, about the nature of the throne, and we have many questions which may be just because Masada didn't want to continue this or that storyline, or just because we don't know enough, and we will know more over the course of Pantheon.
Right.
And, so, despite knowing more than we ever had about Pantheon, we still don't know anything. Like, it's fascinating how much they have told us without actually telling anything of importance.
Yep. Pretty much.
That's what we do. Luckily, the wait is
That's
almost over.
that's how they toy with us.
Yes. And still, we know that Naraka needs 10 gods for something. And this team of gods, the Pantheon, is supposed to fight someone else. It might be Naraka himself, which is what we assumed before. It might be some other unknown force, like the world apoptosis or something. We just don't know. We can only guess, and hopefully we will actually learn more on Friday. So, is there anything else to say about this event that's worth mentioning?
Which event? The event on Friday or
On June 3rd.
on June 3rd? Well, it also adds some other scripts that had fan service moments, like a kindergarten scenario where Kasumi is the kindergarten teacher, and the members of the LDO
I
are.
think it's the junior school, but yeah, it was fun.
Wasn't it kindergarten? It was kindergarten, wasn't it?
Maybe. I
think
don't
it was.
remember actually.
I think it was kindergarten, but it's basically like Kasumi is the kindergarten teacher with the members of the LDO, like Schreiber and Rusalka and Wilhelm as the rowdy children that she has to kind of control. We also had.
We will learn more about that too. When
Yes,
the drama is revealed.
hopefully, because it sounds hilarious. There's also a story that was another script. There were basically 4 scripts.
Yes, there was the Twilight Goddess script, which covered something about the fifth throne. There was Ren and Mari talking to each other about their friends and how they're living right now after their multiple reincarnations.
Yeah, it's basically a continuation of Mari's after story in the novel. It seems like it takes place, I think, 70 or 50 years after the ending of Dies Irae, with Kasumi already being an old lady, and it's basically that. It's basically a continuation of that.
Oh,
and they
as
talk
far
about,
as we know, at least.
As far as we know, yes. And what was the?
And
the
there
other
was
one?
the Zonenji episode.
Right, and there was the Zonenji episode, which, if you don't know, Zonenji was a kind of a chibi, sort of super deformed. I think we could call it a gag reel.
Yes.
That came out towards the release of Dies Irae's anime.
Yes.
Which had Kasumi and Rhea reincarnated as Buddhist monks in a Buddhist temple, basically observing their past lives and commentating.
There are some serious bits. as well.
Yeah, it was basically a funny bit and a serious bit. Like you could have you, for example, you had an episode where Wilhelm appears and they burn him with solar-powered flashlights, and it's very hilarious. And then the next one is basically like some sort of discussion about Wilhelm and his horrible fate of always having his beloved one slip in between his fingers. That's basically right. I think one of the most, by the way, it has probably, despite not being graphic, one of the most horrible deceptions of how Schreiber was maimed
Yes.
and driven to insanity, which is, it was a heavy thing, and it was actually, if I recall, it was even removed because I think it was. I think all of them were removed at some point, but I think the fans
I don't
actually.
think it was because of the maiming.
I don't know if it's that, but the fans did comment that it was a little too much. Masada himself
yes, yes.
about it. So yes, those were the things that happened on June 3rd, and it was, it's fairly interesting, and it had all
we
the
have got on our hands as of now.
yes.
And, this is basically everything we can talk about as of now. But
Everything else would be a lot of speculation. Yes.
yes, we fortunately don't have enough time for that today.
Yes. We've already drawn far too long, I think.
Yes. But we will be back next week, I assume, when we will finally be able to talk about Pantheon or whatever else will be revealed on Friday. Hopefully there will be enough to be discussed.
I'm skeptical at this point, but yes.
Well,
we'll see. We'll see. We'll see. I hope so.
Either way, we can talk about Shinza for hours, so I won't worry about that.
Yes, that much is true.
And until when, I suppose this is where we part for this week.
Yes.
Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to read Dies Irae if you haven't read it already. And please watch the anime even if you don't really like it. I spent my own money on it, and I would want to at least get something out of it, even if it's people's reactions.
Right.
Alright, so until then, see you.
Goodbye.
Hey.